Yeah, let's generate a positive motivation, and then you can recite the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. So get comfortable in your meditation posture. Remember the 8 points of the meditation posture. And then focus your mind on an object of meditation, either your breath or your mind or another object of placement meditation. To placement meditation for a minute or so. And then visualize oneself surrounded by all sentient beings, beginning with your mother and father to your left and your right. So your mother to your immediate left and all your female family and friends to your left and behind you. And then your father of this life to your immediate right. Imagine them sitting together with you meditating. So to your right, your father of this life and all your male friends and family. So here, especially bring to mind independent arising and how you've arisen in dependence upon your mother and father, and how they've arisen in dependence upon their parents and so forth, and and countless other causes and conditions have given rise to you, and there's relationships with your friends and family. Especially try to generate gratitude. And then visualize also those whom you're most prone to become angry with and have to be most put the most effort to generate loving kindness and compassion. So those who you find antagonistic can visualize seated directly in front of you, facing towards you. And then visualize all the other sentient beings of the 6 realms in human form, seated all around you. And again, bring to mind dependent arising. How you exist in dependence upon them, they exist in dependence upon you, from life to life, through countless lifetimes, related to each other in different ways, and continually changing. Mm. Yeah. So then finally remember how oneself and all these other sentient beings seated around oneself are the same. So oneself and others are the same and wishing to have every happiness, stable, lasting, dependent, reliable happiness, and wishing to be free from suffering. So then we can use that as a basis for generating a motivation for this session. And especially thinking how one's every experience of well-being and happiness has arisen in the past in dependence upon other sentient beings, and in the present the same, and in the future up to every every fortunate experience we have up to full enlightenment will all arise in dependence upon other sentient beings. So recognizing their kindness to us, then can try to generate the motivation to do something to return the kindness of others, especially seeing mm, the best possible way to use our body, speech, and mind to repay the kindness of others is to ourselves achieve a state of full enlightenment. Thereby we'll engage in this session to practice, study, contemplation, and meditation upon the Buddhist teachings of dependent arising and selflessness, emptiness. Anyway, in one way or another, then generate a very positive motivation for this session. And then, yeah, we can recite the refuge in bodhicitta prayer. Oh, yeah, so we should visualize that refuge field space in front first. If you like, you can visualize Buddha Dharma Sangha or any object of refuge. Maybe instead of reciting the verse, we can just recite Shakyamuni Buddha's name mantra 3 times, if you like. Taya ta muni muni maha munai so ha taya ta muni maha munai so ha taya ta muni maha munai so. Okay. So remember, yeah, this is when we're studying this module on emptiness is something Shakyamuni Buddha taught. It's like the main thing the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago in India. Yeah, and some research I've read, it says even the conceptual framework of the Four Noble Truths was existent actually prior to Buddha in Hindu teachings as well, or something quite similar to it, the enumeration of four. Yeah, roughly Four Noble Truths. But definitely, what's unique to Buddha's teachings is the idea of selflessness. There's no inherently existent self that moves from life to life. So again, one reason we're looking at emptiness at this point in the Discovering Buddhism course, actually it's usually in the 12th module or something, but we're putting it quite earlier, is because, well, it's so central to Buddha's teachings, and it's something quite difficult. So it's to give you more time to think about it, put it earlier, and then we can reference it and discuss it, reflect on it again and again through the rest of the course. Also because His Holiness Dalai Lama usually encourages for teaching Buddhism, introducing Buddhism to especially people with a modern education, a science-based kind of education, because the teachings on emptiness, they don't need to apply to kind of blind faith in just, you have to, well, this is just so just as it is because that's what the Buddha said kind of thing, but rather it's something we can access through just logic and reason. And because it's the basis of all Buddha's teachings. So by understanding, having some understanding of emptiness, then that explains why, grasping at the opposite of emptiness, by grasping at a self existing from its own side, whether a self of persons or a self of other phenomena, that's the most fundamental cause of suffering. So it's the second noble truth, the cause of the truth, the origin of suffering. And then that gives rise to the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. So it's by grasping at this ignorance, grasping at a self existing from its own side or inherently existing. This kind of main ignorance we're trying to refute when we meditate on emptiness, that gives rise to the first of the two noble truths, the truth of suffering and the truth of the origin of suffering. And it's by realizing the absence of things existing from their own side. So by generating the wisdom, realizing selflessness or emptiness, that so realizing that, in short, is meditation on the path, the truth of the path. And then the final kind of aim of that is to eliminate the root causes of suffering, and so achieve the cessation, the truth of cessation, right? The cessation of the causes of suffering. So that wisdom, realizing emptiness, then gives rise to the second, the later two of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of cessation and the truth of the path. And then based on an understanding of the Four Noble Truths, then only we can get an idea of why the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha are something rare and sublime. Why, the Buddha is a valid teacher, his teaching, the Dharma is a valid teaching. And the spiritual community that realizes and upholds his teachings, Sangha, is a valid kind of community or valid refuge. Okay, so yeah, this is the last session of the 6 sessions on emptiness. This is the last one, and yeah, I'm like to use it as a review session. Although, yeah, when I was preparing for it yesterday, I realized, well, we're also supposed to cover, actually in the FPMT outlines, we're supposed to cover how to meditate, not how to meditate, but I don't know, calm abiding, I think. Anyway, special insight. Yeah, I know it's way too much to cover in all one module. So, and we covered most of, the method for generating, calm abiding in the earlier modules on how to meditate. So, but I do want to present just briefly at the beginning here how to generate special insight. Here, I'll show you. I'll jump to I wasn't planning to make a PowerPoint outline, but then when I was preparing, thought, well, it's just easier. So I did make a little PowerPoint slide. So yeah, here we are, 6 sessions, special insight and review. So there's 4 main headings here. The way to develop special insight. I'll just explain briefly. And then there's some verses. So one of the most common verses to use to meditate on emptiness are from the 3 principal aspects of the path, Patsong Kappa. I went over, I think, one of the verses earlier, but I thought to finish going over the rest of them. And then there's some verses on emptiness recommended by His Holiness. Again, I've already presented some of them, but there's a couple more, the main ones that I want to go over, and then just review, see how much time we have. If we don't have much time, we can also just do that in the meditation sessions. We have 3 meditation sessions planned, I think, for next Tuesday and the Tuesday after that, and then in between one Saturday, we have 2 sessions planned on the Saturday. Yeah, for those who'd like to do kind of at least one full day of retreat on the different meditations we've done during this module. Okay, so first, special insight. And why don't we make it during this session, you can ask questions whenever you want. So if you have any questions, because yeah, I want to mainly answer your question, your whatever remaining questions you have. And we'll also, yeah, try to throw in meditation between each of the, we'll try to meditate at least a bit more during this session between each of these headings. So, but let's just look through, this is all the outlines for special insight, because it's quite simple. It's quite straightforward. Basically, generating special insight here is, what it means is, well, we've been looking at emptiness mainly in an analytical way, thinking about it, how to think about emptiness, but to realize it and to use, this understanding of emptiness to, to actually reduce and clear away our afflictive emotions, right? So reduce our anger, reduce attachment, reduce arrogant pride and jealousy and so forth. We have to, of course, meditate on it. And then, but to reduce not only the kind of gross afflictive emotions that they arise in our mind, but also the imprints of those, the potential for those afflictive emotions to arise in the future when we meet a certain set of causes and conditions, having the potential to give rise to those. We also have to eliminate the subtle imprints or seeds of afflictive emotions. So to reduce, to eliminate those 2 levels of obscurations, the gross and the subtle, we need to meditate on emptiness very, very deeply. So generate a mind that has a very stable and clear and powerful understanding of emptiness, and prolong that wisdom, realizing emptiness for a long time, to kind of gradually eradicate all these afflictions from the mind. That's the main method for eliminating afflictions from the mind. So then the question comes about, well, how do you combine, a kind of intellectual understanding of emptiness together with a mind that's single-pointedly focused on an object in a very deep, unstable way? Because generally, when we think about something, it kind of shakes our mind. It kind of stirs the mind up, right? And it reduces our ability to stay focused on one single thing, because we start thinking about, many things, even just related to one topic. And then conversely, when we focus our mind single-pointedly on one object, it tends to kind of dull whatever understanding, clear understanding we have of something through thinking about it. That sort of the energy of that analysis tends to fade, and the mind tends to become, our understanding of something complex tends to become more dull, right? So it seems like this analytically understanding something complex like emptiness and single-pointedly focusing on an object, is sort of counteract each other. So how do you unify those 2, that single-pointed focus and very sharp analysis of something, into one mind, right? That possesses both the power of single-pointed focus and the power of analysis. And the answer is basically you alternate between the 2. You go back and forth between the 2 until they mutually support each other. So you can combine the idea. So how do we do that? So that's what special insight is. So what special insight is, in short, is when we can generate a mind of calm abiding. So remember, this is when we increase our ability to do placement meditation up until we can sit. We eliminate the faults to single-pointed meditation, which are excitement and laxity. Remember, there's gross and coarse excitement, gross and coarse laxity. So once we have eliminated all those, and we become, very skilled at and habituated to sitting, meditating with a single-pointed focus, single-pointed concentration, then when we've done that, such that we're so sort of attuned to doing that, that we generate calm abiding, which is where we can sit for at least 4 hours or more, and the mind and body are pervaded by sort of bliss and pliancy. So we can sit and effortlessly focus our minds on one object of meditation for 4 hours or longer. That's calm abiding, short. So first we generate calm abiding, and then we shift the focus. And we can usually, when people first generate calm abiding, they don't have emptiness as their object. It's because it's quite difficult to generate calm abiding with emptiness as your object. So generally the idea is you focus on some other object that's more easy to focus on, like your breath or your mind, or a seed syllable or something like that. And then so once you achieve calm abiding, then you focus your mind to emptiness. You shift the object, focus on emptiness. But to focus on emptiness, you have to do some analysis, right? You have to go through the proof that kind of establish emptiness. And to do that, you usually lose your focus, right? Because you start thinking about something. Yeah. So, but then the idea is, yeah. So why don't I go through the points here as they're set out. So first, generate calm abiding. Then cultivate the various lines of reasoning, establishing emptiness, right? And then alternate between analysis, establishing emptiness, and placement meditation. And placement meditation on emptiness, right? So imagine first generate calm abiding, then you want to shift your attention to emptiness. But to do that, you need to do analysis to establish emptiness. In the meantime, your stability of your meditation deteriorates. So then you do the analysis until you come to the conclusion, yes, everything, oneself or other things, empty of inherent existence. And once you come to that conclusion, establishing that things are empty, existing from their own side, then you focus single-pointedly on that. So at that point, when you come to the conclusion, then you stop analyzing and you'll focus single-pointedly on the mere lack of inherent existence, right? So you single-pointedly focus on that for as long as you can. But then as the longer you remain just doing placement meditation on emptiness, you'll find that the clarity, the vividness of your understanding, or the intensity of your understanding of what you've arrived at through analysis, it tends to become weaker, more dull, or less clear, right? So then when you see the clarity decrease, so that's why at first analysis harms stability, like I said, become distracted, and then placement meditation harms the clarity of analysis conclusions, or the conclusions of analysis. So then when you see that, the clarity of the understanding you have of your understanding of emptiness, when it becomes less clear, then you shift back to analysis and go through the different reasonings again to establish emptiness. So at that time, the stability of the mind deteriorates, but the clarity, the wisdom, clearly understanding emptiness increases. So when you again come to a very clear understanding of emptiness through analysis, then you again focus on that. Then you stop analyzing and focus on your conclusion. So this general method of shifting between, thinking about something and coming to an insight of it, and then shifting to single-pointed, concentration that's fully absorbed in the experience of that conclusion, of that understanding that one's arrived at. We can use that in not only in relation to emptiness, but in any kind of meditation where we need to think about and come to an understanding of something, right? So this is a technique we should use in relation to all the Lam Rim topics, basically. You know, whenever we're meditating, especially doing analytical meditation, we should use this kind of technique of shifting between, you know, trying to come to a deeper understanding of something by using, you know, quotations, remembering outlines, asking questions, just thinking about things. And then when we come to a kind of, what do you say, an epiphany, when we come to an insight, then stop at that, recognize that, and stop, and don't just carry on thinking about something else, but try to fully absorb one's awareness into that insight. So do placement meditation on what you've just come to newly understand, right? And do that for as long as you can, you know. And then when you see sort of the intensity of that experience fading, then you go back to analysis and, you know, think about things again and try to come to a new insight, right? So you go back and forth between the two. But then so at what point do you actually generate special insight? So 4 here, you cultivate analysis and placement in alteration until they are mutually supportive, right? So until the point where one's analysis, so here, back to just emptiness, one's analysis increases the stability of mind, right? And where the placement meditation on emptiness itself is so stable and so powerful that it increases the clarity of the understanding, right? So it's basically the idea is you switch back and forth between these two. I almost think like, I mean, I'm not, well, I haven't really done this, but I've heard like when you make mayonnaise, I think, that you, Mariella maybe can comment, that you have two things that want to be separate, like oil and egg white, I think, or egg white or egg yolk. Egg yolk. Okay, so two things that naturally they're separate, but what is it called? You whip them together more and more and more and more and more until they bind, right? And you come up with one kind of unified substance. Anyway, so it's kind of like that. You mix these two, placement meditation and analytical meditation, together again and again and again, you know, by alternating between them until they sort of unify, right? So at that point, when your analysis of emptiness itself makes, you know, your focus on emptiness more stable and increases the stability of focus on emptiness. And when you single-pointedly focus on emptiness, that itself increases the clarity of your understanding of emptiness. Then at that point, and then within that mind, you again generate sort of bliss and pliancy, the sort of physical and mental signs of sort of a special, sort of stable, clear, unified mind realizing emptiness. At that point, you've achieved special insight. Right? So it's a very distinct kind of mind realizing emptiness. So yeah, that gives you the general idea. We won't, I mean, there's a lot more details, of course, as always, but we don't need to go into those here in this context. So yeah, so just if you have that, then yeah, it's also just very useful to know this technique for shifting, how to alternate between placement meditation and analytical meditation, and kind of use them together in a meditation session. So that, and doing that is kind of the very beginning of our pathway to generating special insight. And so a mind of special insight, it doesn't have to be a mind realizing emptiness, right? When we have the same union of analysis and single pointed concentration with regard to any of the topics in the Lam Rim, that's also special insight. You know, can have special insight realizing impermanence and death, special insight, you know, realizing bodhicitta, special insight realizing yeah, any of the topics of the Lam Rim. And in the 5, there's, well, we won't go into it here, but in the 5 paths it's on the path of preparation. that you generate. Actually, the mark of entering the path of preparation is generating special insight, realizing emptiness. For those who know something about the 5 paths. Okay, so let's go on to, well, yeah, so before we meditate, I want to go over these remaining verses of the 3 principal aspects of the path. So this is kind of like a review, because we've already gone over all these ideas, but we'll just look how they're expressed in Tsongkhapa here in this prayer. Yeah, so this 3 principal aspects of the path, I've just extracted the verses on emptiness to look at here. And this is a Lamrim prayer that I hope you should all be familiar with, I think from the module on Lamrim. But if not, I'll send out the prayer. We'll have Marianne send out an attachment afterwards, just to make sure you have it. Yeah, so let's just look. So the headings here, the headings here are added by the translators. But actually, some years ago, Lama Zopa Rinpoche was at Sarah and called Geshe Namdak, and there was someone else too, I forget who, but they worked on this translation together. I think this is the translation that basically Lama Zopa Rinpoche himself kind of worked on this together with Geshe Namdak and some others. So this is the FPMT translation. Okay, so the reason to meditate on the right view. Remember, this is the main thing we covered in the first session. Says here, without the wisdom, realizing ultimate reality. So it's a synonym for emptiness, ultimate reality. So without the wisdom, realizing emptiness, even though you have generated renunciation and the mind of enlightenment. So those are of the 3 principal aspects of the path. Those are the other 2, renunciation and the mind of enlightenment. So yeah, even though you've generated renunciation for samsara, suffering of samsara, and the mind of enlightenment, the mind aspiring to achieve full enlightenment in order to benefit all sentient beings from bodhicitta. With just those 2, you cannot cut the root of cycling, of samsara. So you can't cut the root of, taking rebirth in samsara through the force of afflictive emotions and karma again and again. So to do that, you need to realize emptiness, right? But then it has this kind of a little bit quirky line here, a little bit strange. Well, not strange, but it actually gives deep insight. So it says, so to cut the root of samsara, that's the main reason for studying, contemplating, meditating on emptiness. But the main way to get insight into emptiness is to understand the different kinds of dependent arising. So that's why it has this line. Therefore, attempt the method to realize dependent arising, right? A realization of dependent arising alone won't cut the root of samsara, right? That's why it's a little bit awkward. But it's because dependent arising is the main reason to establish that things are empty of existing from, existing independently. Therefore it says, strive at or attempt to or strive at, make effort at understanding dependent arising. Thereby you realize emptiness, thereby you cut the samsara. So that's the reason, in short, to realize emptiness again. And this is where we have to try to, work. The last thing I want to speak about today is being mindful of emptiness in daily life. And this is where we have to really try to see how does, awareness of, remembrance of, understanding of dependent arising and emptiness, does it help reduce one's own afflictive emotions? So one sees oneself, one has anger, impatience, hostility, greed, jealousy. Does awareness of dependent arising and the selflessness help to reduce those? We have to check that, and then if it does, we have to try to practice more and more. So then, how to generate wisdom, understanding emptiness? Then here, this verse says showing the right view. So it's kind of outlining what the right view of emptiness is. One who sees the cause and effect of all phenomena. So this is one kind of dependent arising. remains one focused on here. One who sees the cause and effect of all phenomena, so how all impermanent phenomena arise from causes and conditions. Other things, one thing gives rise to something else, that gives rise to something else, that gives rise to something else. And how that's unbetraying. Certain causes give rise to certain effects and not to others. Right? So one who sees the cause and effect of all phenomena of both cyclic existence and the state beyond sorrow as for unbetraying. So in samsara, we see how a certain set of causes and conditions gives rise to a certain set of effects, but also in the state beyond samsara. So also in terms of generating liberation and enlightenment, we again have to create causes of liberation, which is one of the main ones is wisdom realizing emptiness, but also accumulation of merit, practicing pure morality, generating single-pointed concentration, the 3 higher trainings, and so forth. So all the realizations of the Lam Rim, basically, they come about in dependence upon putting effort into realizing those things, taking courses like this, giving your attention to study and meditation on Buddhist teachings. So so one who sees the cause and effect of all phenomena of both cyclic existence and the state beyond samsara, beyond sorrow, as forever unbetraying. And so one sees cause and effect as unbetraying, and for whom any object trusted in by the grasping mind has completely disappeared, has at that time entered the path pleasing the Buddhas. So, and for whom, so one sees that because of the dependent arising, things arise in dependence upon causes and conditions. And then even permanent phenomena, which don't arise in dependence upon causes and conditions, permanent phenomena that are all, imputed in relation to other impermanent phenomena. So I don't know, to give it just one example, like existence itself, or object of knowledge. So, or phenomena, maybe that's the easiest in English, phenomena. Anything that exists is a phenomena, right? So the thing, phenomena itself, is a permanent thing, because it's a label for a class of things, among which some are impermanent and some are permanent. Therefore, the thing itself, phenomena, or object of existence, object of knowledge, those things themselves are permanent, but they're labeled upon, they exist in that class of things, phenomena, exists only in dependence upon impermanent things, like the mind. Like if there was no mind, then and consciousness that's aware of things, then it wouldn't mean anything for something to exist, right? For whom would it exist? So maybe that's digressing a little bit if we keep going into that. But in short, permanent things like emptiness, like phenomena, their existence depends upon other things that are impermanent. So indirectly, their existence also depends upon causes and conditions. But in short here, the idea is to see that because all phenomena in the world exist in dependence upon cause and conditions, and for causation to happen, for a certain set of causes and conditions to give rise to something that is other than them, neither of them can have discrete, independent existence. For something to be a cause depends upon its producing an effect, right? If something doesn't produce an effect, and the effect has to be something other than it, right? So if something doesn't produce an effect, then it's not a cause, right? To be a cause means something that produces an effect. And to be an effect means something that is produced by, given rise to, by something other than it, right? So, So for causation to happen, for causes and conditions to give rise to effects, and those effects to give rise to subsequent effects, and then those effects to give rise, everything that is a cause is also an effect of its causes. and everything that is an effect is also a cause of its effects. So basically, cause and effect here are one meaning. Whatever is a cause is also an effect. Whatever is an effect is also a cause, right? And that's how this chain of causation happens. So this comes back to what Ors's question last session. If there are no discrete independent phenomena, how can there be cause and effect? How can that work? But actually, the best way to answer that question is to kind of ask the opposite thing. If there are discrete independent phenomena, how can cause and effect work? Right? So we tend to think, when we think about emptiness, we think, okay, everything's empty of inherent existence, and nothing exists from its own side. Then we tend to think, well, then things don't have the power to function, because when you search for the thing, you can't find it. When you search for anything among its parts, right? The main analysis we do on emptiness is we think of a phenomena. It appears to exist from its own side, but then we search to see, does it actually exist in that way? We look at how actually anything exists as being something imputed upon a set of parts. Its basis of imputation. It's mainly what we were talking about last time. And so when we search, we find this whole collection of parts, but the thing that we started looking for, it's not anything among those parts, right? So it kind of breaks down. We can't find it. And then come to the conclusion it doesn't exist from its own side. So then within that kind of view that something exists from its own side, we tend to jump to the conclusion, well, then it can't function, right? It can't function to produce effects, to do anything. Because when you look for it, it's not findable. It's as if it's just an illusion, right? So just as like a mirage that you see in the desert, it can't quench your thirst. No matter how much you try to drink a mirage, like you're going to be just as thirsty, more thirsty than you were before. So, but that's kind of like what I was saying is like kind of the mystery of emptiness, is that although things, when you search for, they're not findable. They don't exist. There's nothing there from its own side. But yet they have the power to function. That's one of the most difficult things to understand. But one way to think about it, if we think about it a different way, is like, okay, so if things did exist from their own side, right? What would that mean, right? We tend to forget about that. That would mean, well, in one hand, when you search for something, you find something concrete and real that you can identify, oh, this is that thing. So in relation to ourselves, it seems like we're just there. We just exist as I am. I just am a person. Like it's not anything complicated. It's just real. I'm there. But when we search for, the real I, that is me, for example, and if we found this concrete, independent, thing, what that would mean is that thing, its existence doesn't depend upon anything else. It doesn't depend upon the body, doesn't depend upon our mind, doesn't depend upon an idea of myself. There's just real independent thing existing there. And the existence of that doesn't depend, it doesn't rely upon anything else. So then and imagine everything existed in that way as a discrete, independent entity existing from its own side, then how can anything produce anything else? Because nothing has to depend upon anything else, right? So then it would be like, even so, like, we'll take a laptop, because I'm looking at my laptop, because I'm looking at the screen here. So how do you produce like a laptop, for instance? Like, because you can't take, if the laptop has its own inherent existence, it can't be the case that you take a bunch of things that are not a laptop and put them together and then get a laptop, right? Because those things, they each exist, all those parts, they each exist on their own. And then and they can't relate to each other. As soon as they relate to each other, they're changed. Just as soon as we relate to another person, that person is different by having met us, and we're different by having met that person. Like, we're different people. We change from the person who had no relationship with that other person to someone who does have a relationship. And inanimate phenomena are the same. You know, you take like a key of the laptop, like the M key, you know, the key with the letter M, and you conjoin it with all these other things, and it's something that wasn't, you know, didn't function in relation to all those other parts, to something that now does function in relation to other parts. So it's something different. The thing changes. So if things exist from their own side, then they can't change like that. No, they just are what they are, without, you know, without reference to or irrelevant of anything else. So if things exist in that way, in that independent way, then they can't combine to produce a third thing, right? So you can't. So then you wouldn't be able to stick with the laptop analogy. You wouldn't be able to combine a bunch of discrete parts together to produce a laptop, right? Because the laptop, it should be something, you know, existing from its own side, without depending upon all those parts and without depending on causes and conditions. So yeah, that's the real way to answer that question, is to think, imagine that if things really have this discrete, independent, separate existence, how can they produce causes? How can they act as causes to produce effects? How can they give rise to other things that didn't exist before? They couldn't. That would be totally impossible. Yeah, so now we'll go back to, so that's kind of what he's saying here, is that one who sees the cause and effect of all phenomena, of both cyclic existence and the state beyond samsara, as forever unbetraying, and for whom any object trusted in. So you see that cause and effect is unbetraying. Certain causes give rise to certain effects. And then seeing that, though, then by that one realizes nothing exists from its own side. Everything exists independent upon other things. So, and for whom any object trusted in by the grasping mind, the mind grasping at inherent existence, has completely disappeared, has at that time entered the path pleasing to the Buddhas. So now the mistake, right? So this is when one has not, this next verse, one has not realized. So if the appearance that is unbetraying dependent origination, right? So if this cause and effect, the appearance of that, you know, on one hand, unbetraying cause and effect, causes giving rise to effects, is on, you understand that on one hand, is accepted separately from emptiness. But then emptiness seems like something else that's unrelated to that, right? When you can only conceptualize them, you only think of them as two separate, different things. Cause and effect on one hand, yes, okay, that's there. And then emptiness on the other hand, something separate. So they appear as two separate things to one's mind. As long as these two understandings are seen as separate, then one has not realized the Buddha's intent. Right? So as long as these two seem as two separate things, one hasn't realized the Buddha's intent. So yeah, so here I'll just throw in this verse from the Heart Sutra, which I think you probably heard of before, have probably been exposed to, is form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is not other than emptiness. Emptiness is not other than form. It means form being a physical, you know, physical phenomena. Itself, its own nature is, because it's been produced by causes and conditions, thereby it means it's empty of existing from its own side, because it's been produced by something else. Something else gave rise to it. So the nature of form is actually emptiness. And then we say, so form is emptiness. And then when you say emptiness is form, it means emptiness itself, it depends upon the existence of form and other phenomena. Emptiness itself, it also doesn't exist isolated in and of its, you know, from its own side, in and of its own right. You know, it existing, that emptiness of inherent existence depends upon, you know, its existence depends upon being a characteristic of other phenomena, being a quality of other phenomena. So in that way, emptiness itself is form. It's a characteristic. It's one nature with form. And then form is not other than emptiness. Form doesn't exist as something separate from emptiness. And emptiness also doesn't exist as something separate from form. So that's what it's saying here. As long as you understand emptiness and form in terms of the Heart Sutra, or emptiness and some, you know, anything and emptiness being separate, you know, conventional phenomena like causes causes and effects, and ultimate phenomena, emptiness. As long as you conceive of those two as existing in isolation from, separate from each other, you haven't realized the intent of the Buddha. So then the next. So this is the most important verse in the whole of this three principal aspects of the path. If these, so actually it's not if, it's more like when. I'm going to disagree with Lama Zopa here. When these two realizations, in Tibetan, the word very much connotates a time. So when you, anyway, if these realizations, or when these realizations are happening simultaneously without alteration. So when these two realizations of unbetraying dependent relation and emptiness, when instead of being something we conceive of as separately and we think of them in at different times discretely, when they happen simultaneously, when one naturally produces an understanding of the other, so they're completely kind of unified. If these two realizations, or when these two realizations happen simultaneously without alteration, so what realizations? Of the two realizations of unbetraying dependent relation and emptiness, right? When those two happen simultaneously without alteration, so they're unified, such that from merely seeing dependent relation as completely unbetraying, and the definite ascertainment comes that completely destroys the way all objects are apprehended as truly existent. So when merely by seeing that phenomena are dependently arising, that itself destroys our grasping at them as existing from their own side, right? And you could also flip it around. When merely seeing that, and that's what the next verse does actually, but when merely seeing that phenomena are empty of inherent existence, that itself reminds us that they are dependently arising. So when those two understandings are unified, at that time the analysis of the ultimate view is complete. And then this next verse, the particular special quality of the Prasangika view, is that furthermore, so appearance eliminates the extreme of existence. So when the appearance, just by anything appearing to your mind, that itself eliminates the extreme of existence. So ordinarily when things appear to our mind, that causes us to think that they exist from their own side, because they have the power to appear from their mind. Because things have the power to appear to our mind, ordinarily that means that they have some integral power from their own side, in and of their own right, that exist in and of their own right. But when we understand that all phenomena are dependently arising, in a deep way, on causes and conditions, on parts, on mental imputation, then just the mere appearance, the fact that things can appear to our mind, we realize means that they don't exist as discrete independent entities. They exist as things that interact with other things, and we exist as things that interact with other things. So that mere appearance of dependent arising, that itself eliminates the extreme of existence. Means the extreme of grasping at things, ourself or other things, as existing from their own side. So that functionality, that mere appearance of things, that itself eliminates grasping at things as existing independently. And then the next, emptiness, understanding of emptiness eliminates the extreme of non-existence, right? So ordinarily, if we have not a good understanding of emptiness, independent arising, then when we think, things are empty of inherent existence, we tend to fall into the extreme, it tends to lead us into the extreme that nothing exists, the extreme of non-existence. But when we have a good understanding of emptiness, meaning that emptiness and dependent arising are two sides of the same coin, then the understanding of that phenomena are empty of existing from their own side, that itself produces the understanding that all phenomena are interdependent, right? And so all phenomena arise in dependence upon other things other than themselves. So that refutes the extreme of nihilism, right? Because whatever is dependent arising, it can't not exist. It has to exist to be a dependent arising. So therefore, furthermore, appearance eliminates the extreme of existence, and emptiness eliminates the extreme of non-existence. If you realize how emptiness manifests in the manner of cause and effect, right, then you are not captivated by wrong notions, holding extreme views. Yeah, any questions so far about any of those things? Yes.
So going back to the verse on showing the right view from the three principal aspect, just want to confirm, they talk about the path pleasing, at that time entered the path pleasing the Buddhas. That's the end of the path of accumulation and the beginning of the path of preparation with a conceptual understanding of emptiness.
Has entered the path pleasing the Buddha. So you're asking, is that the end of the path of accumulation and the beginning of the path of preparation?
Yeah.
No, it's not talking about. No, there it's not talking about path. I mean, to my understanding, I haven't read a commentary on the three principles of the path lately, but it wouldn't really make sense because I don't think it's talking about the path in a concrete way and relating to one of the five paths. It's more talking about just in a general way. You've entered sort of in a general way. You've entered the path pleasing the Buddha. You've sort of entered the kind of right way of thinking.
Right track. Okay.
The Buddha outlined. Yeah, it's not talking about a concrete path. Because here, when you have the right view of emptiness, you don't have to be on any path yet. You can generate a valid realization of emptiness before you enter, even the path of accumulation.
Okay.
And at that point, you would have the understanding it's talking about there. And so, hold on, Mary Ellen, what is it? What is that called when you combine these two, like the egg yolk and the oil? That's a kind of. An emulsification, yeah, that exactly, an emulsification. Okay.
That's a brilliant analogy, by the way.
Isn't it? Yeah, I didn't think of it before. It just arose through the blessing of someone. Yeah, I think it's quite a good, for calm abiding and anyway, emptiness. Okay. Any other questions at this point? Things that we discussed. Sometimes I feel like I'm just throwing out words like fast, and I'm not sure if they're going into your minds or not.
I have another small question if nobody has a question.
Sure.
And it's I looked back in the all right, so we're studying this in from many directions in this class and in other classes. So I went back to the root text to take a look, and it talks about
Which root text?
The Atisha's Lamp for the Path.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't happen to have it. Oh, here it is. I do have it. It talks about skillful means in a way that sounds like it doesn't mean just like skillful means as we use in English. And it's when you're talking about special insights into things that are not emptiness, it refers to those as skillful means.
Yeah, that's just, you can divide up the whole, everything in the Buddha's teachings to, wisdom and method. So method is another translation for skillful means, or skillful means is another translation for method. So basically, all the topics, in all the Buddha's teachings, there are those that are about emptiness, which is the wisdom side of the path, and those are about everything else, pure morality, impermanence and death. That's all skillful means, right? So so what he's saying is you can generate special insight, not only with relation to the wisdom side of the path, emptiness and selflessness, but also with regard to the method side of the path, the skillful means side of the path.
Okay.
Loving kindness, compassion, generosity.
Thank you.
Sure. Why don't we take a break now? We'll take a 5-minute break.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Yes. There's one question.
I think the part where it says if the two realizations are happening simultaneously, would you talk a little bit more about simultaneously what that really means?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, that is a bit, yeah, that does bring up, I mean, that brings up a lot of questions, actually. She's talking about here in the second verse on the screen, if the two realizations are happening simultaneously, without alteration. Because, yeah, literally, yeah, this is something actually is debated about a lot in the Gelugpa school, because this is kind of an uncommon presentation of Tsongkhapa. Because literally, you can't have one mind, well, because dependent arising is a conventional phenomena. It's a conventional truth. Emptiness is an ultimate truth, right? These are the two truths, conventional truth and ultimate truth. So literally, you can't, for an ordinary sentient being, you can't have one mind that simultaneously directly perceives both a conventional truth and an ultimate truth, right? We can only directly realize one or the other at a time. So then what does it mean to have one mind simultaneously realizing both? I think what it means here is that, well, usually this is the way it's usually explained, is that that the realizations are so close that basically one gives rise to the other without any other thinking required, meaning that when our understanding of dependent arising and our understanding of emptiness are so integrated that when we see that something is a dependent arising, like when I mean, let's try to make this more concrete. Like it means, when you walk out and outside and you walk through a garden and you see the grass growing, that immediately gives rise to the understanding that grass is empty of existing from its own side. And when you're when you're, I don't know, when you're cooking and you see that you made a nice dish of pasta, and you think of all the things you did to produce this nice plate full of pasta, that immediately you just reflect on the dependent arising of that. And that immediately impels, without reference to any other reasons, without need to think of anything else, that understanding of dependent arising immediately brings forth an understanding of emptiness, right? And then conversely, when you're doing analysis to understand emptiness, when you come to the insight that something is empty from its own side, that doesn't give rise to the extreme of nihilism, but that understanding of emptiness immediately, without reference to any other reasoning, gives rise to the fact that the thing that you're realizing is empty of inherent existence, or emptiness itself, are dependently arising, right? So that's what it means, is that not that, because they're not the same thing, right? So there's not, for ordinary being, there's not one mind that can expressly realize both. But what it means is the understanding of one, dependent arising, without reference to anything else, immediately, by its own power, it gives rise to understanding of emptiness. And the understanding of emptiness gives rise to, the understanding of dependent arising. That they're so associated in your understanding with each other that one, gives rise to understanding of the other. Almost like, like mother and child. When we realize that someone's a child, we realize immediately they have parents. When we realize someone's a parent, it immediately gives rise to this understanding that they have children, right? Those two are not the same. To understand that someone, that someone has children, understanding that, well, like, is a parent, they're slightly different, right? Well, I mean, and that would be that, because to be a parent means you have children. It's just the meaning of being a parent. So it's a little different, but I think you can see how it's similar, because, like, we think about, like, say, a friend or a work colleague, or someone, a stranger. We don't usually think of them as being a child, especially if they're a fully grown adult. We don't usually think of someone as being a child. But it doesn't take much to realize that they are, because everyone is a child of someone. So when we think of that, though, oh, they're also, a child of someone, then that, that mind thinking they're a child, it doesn't realize they're parents, right? But without reference to anything else, just that understanding that they're a child, it gives rise to understanding that they have parents, right? That way it worked a little better. Yeah. Anyway, you can see that that's the idea, basically. So,
So
all right, let's take a break.
Okay,
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
No, go ahead, go ahead. We'll
would
finish.
this be what it means by having conceptual realization of emptiness when these two happen simultaneously?
Well, yes, in a way. Yeah, I mean, to have a correct understanding of emptiness, you let me make sure I'm not putting my foot in my mouth, but yeah, to have, I think, yeah, to have, I think you can say to have a correct conceptual understanding of emptiness, you have to understand it as related with dependent arising in this way. If you don't, if your understanding of emptiness, like it says in the verse before this, is something separated from, isolated from dependent arising, then it's not complete. Right? You just have a partial, half-baked understanding. So, and this is talking about a conceptual understanding. Yes, this is nothing about non-conceptual understanding. This is just a conceptual understanding of emptiness. If it's correct, then it relates to dependent arising in this way. Okay. Christine, do you have a hand up? I thought I saw a hand there. Anyway, if not, we'll take a break. Okay.
Hi, sorry. So I have a question and I'm not even sure how to even formulate this question. But so is it correct to say that if we understand dependent arising and we understand emptiness, that understanding is supposed to cut the root of samsara? Is that accurate?
Yes, but only gradually, not like right away.
Okay.
Right? It means we have to deepen that understanding over, time.
Okay, because I guess I feel like I'm missing something. Like I feel like this understanding is supposed to somehow reduce afflictive emotions and make me feel better. And, but if I get cut off in traffic, I'm still pissed off, right? Even though I can sit there and talk through the logic of, oh, well, that car doesn't really exist from its own side. And I feel like I'm just missing.
Well, it's the driver who's driving the car that you're pissed off at, right?
Yes. But I don't know. So I don't even know what my question is. I feel like I'm just missing something.
No, it's true. Yeah, no, and don't. This is one of the most difficult things I think in the Lam Rim, in the Buddhist teachings, is how to use this understanding of emptiness to actually reduce afflictive emotions. And it's a common experience. I mean, they do seem disconnected at first. That, because, well, and because, I mean, at this point, when we're new to understanding of emptiness, it's a very intellectual thing in our head. And it's difficult. And then the afflictive emotions rise, it's a very emotional thing, right?
Right. Yes.
And it seems very different. Yeah, that's something we need to, when we work on gradually, as the understanding of dependent arising and emptiness we become more familiar with it, and more sort of attuned to it, more comfortable with it, and it becomes more kind of habitual. More habitual, or basically we're more familiar with it. Then we can use it to, when afflictive emotions, like being irritated at someone for doing something like cutting us off in traffic, we can bring it, to bear on that, the way we're looking at that situation that's causing us to be irritated in that moment, right? But now it's like, that's the last thing that's going to come to mind, like when we're irritated in traffic, is that understanding of emptiness. But but when we, so just let's just walk through your example though, how if we're more habituated to understanding emptiness, how it could work is that we're driving in traffic, just going about our routine. Someone cuts us off, it's really dangerous, really annoying, really inconsiderate of the person. They really should have not done that, right? But and we get angry at them. But I mean, one way, just look at dependent arising first. Like emptiness is always more difficult. Dependent arising is always more easy to think about, right? So look at the dependent arising first. Well, I mean, why are we getting angry? First of all, we can see that, well, by getting angry, what does that accomplish? Right? Just look at our own anger, like nothing. It just makes us unhappy and miserable, and it doesn't stop. The person's already cut us off. It's not going to stop that from happening. That's already happened. And it's not make that person any less likely to do that again in the future, maybe more likely, right? And so, okay, where is that anger going? It's not going anyplace good, right? So just that understanding of dependent arising can help reduce that. And then well, here the main one here is we look at, well, who is it that's angry? We're angry because they cut off me, right? They cut me off. Who is the me that they cut off, right? Then you search for that one, and you can't find. Now, of course, that seems like, that can seem like a bizarre thing to do in that moment, in a way. And but I mean, the reason we would do that in the moment is because we already recognize that it is because I have this strong grasping at me. Then when other people do things to that, my idea of me that I don't like, then I react so strongly. So that's why it's important, like, to go back to, one of the very first things we talked about, one of the first sessions, is it's just so important to see how this grasping at a concrete sense of I gives rise to anger and attachment and all the other afflictive emotions. It's only when we realize that that really is the case, and that takes some reflection and some thought, some investigation. When we realize that's the case, then it becomes meaningful to us to do the analysis of emptiness to reduce that. But and then I want to mention something else, because this is something, I find it's not mentioned so much, but there's a danger of that, if in that moment when someone cuts us off and we get angry, on the one hand, if we start doing the analysis to see, like, okay, where is the I that they cut off? On the one hand, it can reduce the sense of anger just because we're thinking about something else, right? The thing that makes us angry is when we think about, what an idiot that guy is, like, for driving like that. The more we think about how could someone be so inconsiderate and drive like that and be so dangerous and just jump right in front of me, then the more upset we get, right? So because we're focusing our mind on something that we really don't like, right? But if we just start thinking about, like, our favorite flavor of ice cream in that moment, that's also going to reduce our anger, just because we're thinking about something else than the thing that makes us angry, right? So in a one way, I mean, if we start thinking about dependent arising and emptiness, it can reduce anger like that, just because we're thinking about something else. But that's not our objective here. That's very weak, right? That's not very meaningful. Just thinking about something else. So what we really want to use in this moment is, another way is to really think of in a meaningful way about dependent arising and emptiness. So another way to think is that, when we're angry at the person, the object of our anger, the person who's driving the car, who just cut us off, is, well, just think about using dependent arising there. Think about, why did they do that? Maybe they just didn't see us. Maybe they're they didn't realize they cut us off. They just, they couldn't see well. They just weren't being mindful. Or they just couldn't see, or they were, maybe they're also feeling, in the midst of heavy traffic, people get stressed, and just like we get stressed, people, and then they don't make the best decisions just because they're kind of frazzled. Maybe they're not, maybe they're from the countryside and they're not used to driving on a big, multi-lane highway in a big city with a lot of traffic. And so thinking about, what are the causes and conditions that gave rise for them to pull in front of me like that? That can help see that, it helps break down our concrete idea of that person doing something bad to hurt me. It breaks down that, and that also, so that's probably the other most effective way. So one, we do the analysis on where is this anger coming from within me? Why is it arising? Who is the person that is feeling hurt, and why am I reacting like this? And then the other way, why did that person act like that? When you investigate that, it helps give you a more complex picture, which is actually the fact. And the fact that one action they make, it's part of an infinitely complex, interconnected web of events that resulted in that right there. So when we understand that complex web of events, it can easily give rise to, instead of being angry, we can be compassionate. That person, oh, maybe they're really not in the right mind. That's why they kind of put in front of me like that. So yeah, but in either case, yeah, it's true, we do have to bring this kind of understanding, introductory understanding we have of dependent arising emptiness now. It's at a very intellectual, removed, abstract kind of level to, very practical, integrated with our daily life experience. And that requires work, reflection again and again. So that's why on the meditation cushion, we need to bring in those experiences where, okay, someone did something that really annoyed me, and then practice, how do I, integrate this understanding of dependent arising into that? And then, so when we do that on the meditation cushion, we take our real life experience, bring them to mind, and then look at how to use this understanding of dependent arising and emptiness in relation to that. And we do that again and again and again, then it becomes more habitual. Then, an easy real life experience is more like not when someone's annoying us, but when we're walking through the park and just looking at, the grass and the flowers and the animals. And, then it's relaxed, easy. We can think about dependent arising emptiness. But we do that again and again. And then, yeah, the times when we really need it, when we're getting angry, when people are doing things to confront us, to challenge us in different ways, that's when we really need it. And that's, we can only use it at that time, at that situation, if we're already very familiar with it. You might have remember I mentioned earlier the analogy of kayaking, like, to do an Eskimo roll. To do an Eskimo roll, like in a swimming pool with an instructor, when that's what you're planning to do, you already position the paddle, and you roll over on purpose and then pop yourself up. It's not that difficult, right? But to do that in whitewater, when a big wave just like flipped you over in the middle of a river, is a completely different thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so now let's take a break for 5 minutes. So so I want to do some, we'll do a short meditation, and then I hope I can explain. There's 2 more verses by His Holiness I'd like to explain. Well, I don't know, maybe I could just go to this now. Yeah, well, I'll do now. I'll explain later. Yeah, so we'll do a meditation on, I mean, you're always welcome to meditate on whatever you feel like thinking about, but I'll suggest meditating on, dependent arising versus the object of negation versus things existing from their own side. So I think we'll start by just think about dependent arising in different ways, and you'll have to come up with your own examples. look at dependent arising in different ways. And then we'll shift to trying to identify the object of negation. In the different ways we talked about before. And then we'll shift back to dependent arising. Kind of go back and forth. It can help to kind of go back and forth between looking at dependent arising and then identifying the object of negation, to kind of, and going back and forth between the two to sort of get a clearer sense of what the object of negation is. I mean, in general, it's always good to reflect on, meditate on dependent arising, especially as a basis for emptiness. But then in the 4-point analysis, the first step is to identify the object of negation, meaning the way, so we'll stick with the selflessness of persons first, but the way a phenomena appears to be existing from its own side, in and of its own right, or by its own power. Okay, so first, just get comfortable in your meditation posture. Get settled on your in your meditation seat. And then focus your mind for a moment on an object of meditation, be it your breath or something else. And just kind of relax and gather your attention to one focal object. Mm. And then, just reflect on, very gently, kind of casually, just reflect on dependent arising, using different analogies from your own experience. So, and you could choose any of the different types of dependent arising. So remember, there's 3 main types: things being produced from causes and conditions, things existing in dependence upon different kinds of parts, and then things existing in dependence upon being imputed by the mind. So the mind imputing, this is this, upon a collection of parts, a basis of imputation, imputing things. Yeah, so however you want, use your own examples, and try to think of all 3 or any one of the different kinds of dependent arising for a few minutes. Mm. So now, stop thinking about dependent arising, and instead we'll try to identify the object of negation. So here, we'll try there's two different ways mainly. So one is to think about a time when you were, became highly emoted, especially when you're suddenly felt fear, like almost got in a car accident, or when you're in an airplane and the airplane suddenly drops, hits an air bubble and drops. Or when someone falsely accuses you of doing something that you didn't do wrong and you feel defensive. Or also when you feel jealous of someone else, is quite a good one. So when those kind of afflictive emotions, in general, the principle is whenever an afflictive emotion arises at its source, there's always a heightened sense of I that arises together with it. Mm. So one way is to think about one of those kind of different afflictive emotions arise, and then look at how the I, how oneself appears to exist at that time with a corner of your mind. Look at it. Another way, though, is to just to ask yourself questions like self-referential questions, like what am I doing? Where am I? What's my name? And then let this ordinary sense of I arise, and then look at how that exists. That one's a little more subtle, a little more difficult to do. But anyway, you can spend a few minutes using one of those two methods and try to get a sense of how the self, the I, ordinarily appears when we're not analyzing in any way. Mm, okay. And now shift back to thinking about dependent arising. But now think about dependent arising of oneself as a person. So you can just let go of trying to be aware of the object of negation, how one ordinarily appears, and just look at how oneself as a person is changing moment by moment, is produced, upon causes and conditions, either from the distant past or even in the present moment, is continually arising in dependence upon causes and conditions, is composed of different parts, and especially how the idea of I, self, is something mentally, conceptually imputed, that we impute upon this collection of different parts. So spend a couple minutes thinking about the dependent arising of oneself as a person. Mhm. And then again, stop thinking about dependent arising and shift back to trying to identify the object of negation. And one of the two ways, the two methods of just trying to turn a corner of one's mind towards oneself and look at how one appears to exist. And then it can help to ask the self-referential questions, like where am I? What am I doing? What's my name? What's my age? And so forth. Or the easier one, think about a time you were irritated or annoyed or felt defensive, falsely accused or jealous, or proud, very proud, kind of like when you walk into, I don't know, a room where people are gathered for your birthday or something like that, or you get a prize, everyone's turning their attention to you. You feel this heightened sense of self. Anyway, as you try to get this, identify how we grasp at a concrete sense of self ordinarily, then gradually also compare that with the sense you have when you think about dependent arising of yourself. But first, just try to identify the object of negation. Okay, so now relax your attention. We'll just keep it short. Why don't we, I don't know, are there any burning questions right now? Otherwise, we'll do discussion group for 10 minutes.
I have one question. It's about the chariot and its parts. Like, I can understand why the chariot is not its parts, but why is the chariot not the compilation of its parts? Like, I guess I keep thinking about the chariot as, you know, conventionally that it's entirety of parts. So I kind of get a little bit confused on that.
Yeah, that's kind of a sticking point generally. Well, there's one of the reasons is that if the chariot was just a compilation of its parts, then it should be the case that when you have all the parts of the chariot, then you automatically have a chariot. But so typically it's said, well, but you can just take all the parts apart, no, and have them all there, put them in a heap together, but not, put together, and you don't have a chariot because the parts they don't function as a chariot. If you take all the wheels and the shaft and, or take a car, take all the parts at the door and take everything apart and have a heap of it there, that's not a car, right? All the parts are there, but it's not a car. So additionally, you have to have them fit together to function as a chariot. So that's another difficult question is, well, what if you have all the parts together, all the parts, and they're together such that they're functioning as the object? Is that collection of parts the chariot? Or all the parts fit together so that they function as a chariot? But still, it's not a chariot, and here it's a little more difficult to see why not. But it's because, well, one way to think about it is like this: because that collection of parts of the chariot is a collection of parts, whereas the chariot itself is not a collection of parts. It's just one thing, right? So, and one way to help think about it is like this: is when chariot appears to your mind, or maybe car, since we don't usually think about chariots. Car appears to your mind like, I don't know, say, I don't know what kind of cars you see around here. I'm in Italy, right? So you always see Fiats. Panda Fiat is like it's kind of like Honda Civic in the US. It's like a little small economy car. Anyway, when you think of or you could just think of your car. When you think of your own car, is it one object appearing to your mind, or does it look like, a collection of things appears to your mind? It's one object, right? A car. You just think, okay, it's a car. It's one thing. Whereas think about when you think of the collection of parts of the car, what appears to your mind is something very different, right? It's a collection of all parts. So you can see then how it's not the same to be a collection of parts. It's true, the car has a lot of parts, but the car is a possessor of all the parts. Maybe that's the best way. I mean, why the whole collection of parts of the car put together to function as a car? Why is that not the car? Because the car is the thing that possesses all those parts. They're all parts of the car. So they can't be both the thing that possesses the parts, the car, and the thing that is possessed by the parts, right? Maybe that's the most clear reason why all the collection, the collection of parts of the chariot is not the chariot, because of the thing that's possessed by the chariot, right? But then, I mean, just to add another reason is because when that collection appears to your mind, what appears to your mind is multiple things, right? As a set, a collection of things. What appears to your mind when you think of chariot is just one thing, right? So you can see that they're different in that way. And then in another way, that the chariot or the car is something imputed upon that collection of parts. So they're also different because the collection of parts, even put together to function as the car, it's the basis of imputation for imputing car. It's on that collection of parts that we impute car. Car is the thing imputed upon that. And it's, so there's a difference between the thing imputed upon the basis and the basis of imputation. So there's those three ways you can think about it. They're different in that one is the thing possessed, the other is the possessor. They're different in that one is the basis of imputation of car, and the other is the thing imputed upon the basis. And they're different in that one appears as just one single thing, and the other appears as a group of things. But yeah, that's a difficult one, and that's one when we do the analysis to find. Yeah, that's a place we often get stuck. I think I've thought about that a lot for years. Why, and debated with my classmates about it. We studied the middle way view for 4 years. That was one of my big questions. Like, why isn't, think about in relation to the person, why isn't just the collection of all the parts of our body and all the parts of our mind, fit together, they function as a person? Why isn't that the person? It's not an easy thing, but if you think about it again and again, and those 3 reasons I gave, I think it becomes clearer and clearer. The other place we get stuck on, well, I don't know, the other questions. We only have 5 minutes left now, so maybe there's no point to go to discussion groups. Yeah. Another place we get stuck though is when we try to find the I, is our mental consciousness, the stream of consciousness. Like, why isn't that the I? That's another difficult one. Yeah, but I wanted to, since this is our last session, I wanted to emphasize maybe actually more, instead of talking about that, is yeah, it's good to try how to integrate this this whole understanding of dependent arising and emptiness in daily life, and to actually use as antidote, for our afflictive emotions, because that's the whole point. But it's not easy to see how. I think, yeah, like I said in response to Christine's question, the kind of the best starting point is just think about dependent arising. Don't worry so much about emptiness at first. Think more about how things are dependently arisen, and use that as an antidote to afflictive emotions. So yeah, and again, we have to start on the meditation cushion and then take it more into awareness in daily activities of life. But so on the meditation cushion, like we were just doing, think about dependent arising in different ways. But then, if you're meditating in the morning, think about what you're going to be doing that day, and think about the different kinds of dependent arising that will appear. Talk to other people, interact with other people as you buy things. Where did those things come from? Where did you get the money? As you go different places, how you're able to go different places, independence upon there being roads and transportation and vehicles, and how those things arose, independence upon, this whole evolution of scientific understanding and stuff. But then especially think about, instances, situations that might give rise, that typically trigger you, right? Give rise to, either attachment. You're going to think about this person, be attached, or think about this thing, or irritation, in relationship with someone, and think about dependent arising, those situations, how one's own emotional response is a dependent arising. Usually when we're triggered by something, it's because we have a historical, it's like a pattern of response that we've developed since we were children, or even in previous lives, that and there's a history, especially when there's a person. We usually respond to them not just based on immediately what happened in that moment, but based on a whole set of encounters, experiences we've had with that person, in the duration of our relationship, or even things we've heard about that person from another person before we met them. But think about, how, especially, we have to combine this with our understanding of how attachment and anger, as the 2 kind of root afflictive emotions that arise from ignorance, how they work. Like anger always observes merely focuses almost exclusively on the unattractive, the negative aspects unpleasant aspects of its object. So when we think about dependent arising, it already starts to break that down and help us see that, oh yeah, this mind of anger I have towards that person, it's just focused exclusively on these things that appear to me as very unattractive, unpleasant about that person. But there's other aspects of the person, right? So so when you think about how the person is a dependent arising, they have a history, they have parents, they have family, they have friends, and they're in the midst of, who knows? We have no idea what. So already we can start to see how there might be other, attractive aspects of the person that I'm not considering. And also it helps, anger also has an element of a bit of arrogance with it too, that I know what's going on. So when we think about, what do I actually know about the situation, the person that I'm angry at, it helps to us to see our own ignorance, actually, that we don't know what's going on with so much of that person. And so how can we jump to a conclusion? How can we be a judge? Yeah, so, but just thinking about the dependent arising of the other person, of us, of our response to them, why we met. And then also there's karma. I mean, I haven't even mentioned karma, but why is this happening to me? Why am I responding like that? It's also related to karma. So all of that dependent arising, though, then when we look to see, well, who is the actual person I'm angry at? Who is the actual person I that's getting angry? Then it helps to break that down. So it's not, we see that it's not just there's one concrete real I. Actually, I am, and it's not that I have to, I'm just like this and I have to respond in that way. That's just who I am. When we look to see, who is the I that's responding, actually it's a very complex thing, composed of many, many different parts. And so there is space to change the way we think about the whole situation and the way we react. Anyway, in short, we're out of time now, but in short, that's the kind of, so we want to just generally in daily life, whatever we're doing, we can think about dependent arising. I mean, we can use that as a catalyst to think about different kinds of dependent arising. And then, especially in meditation, we look at what kind of afflictive emotions do we usually give rise to, and how can we relate the understanding of dependent arising to those. And then we try to do actually in when actually we have attachment or pride or nervousness arising. If we can get some quiet space for a moment, then try to apply this reasoning of looking at dependent arising and how things are empty of existing from their own side, then creates a lot of space in a situation to think about things in different ways. Okay, so let's dedicate now. And yeah, think about, especially this is the last teaching or instruction session for this module. So think about all that we've done, all we've covered in these 6 sessions, and rejoice in one's own merit created and the merit of the others in the group. And then we can rejoice in all the merit created by all the Buddhist teachers from Shakyamuni Buddha down to us that make it possible for us to have access to this way of looking at things, this teaching, this view. And then we can rejoice in all the merit created by all the other sentient beings in general and all enlightened beings. So this great collection of merit gathered together, we can dedicate that in short, all sentient beings are free from every form of suffering, especially can be free from the ignorance, not understanding, dependent origination that gives rise to so many problems. That all sentient beings, ourselves and others, can give rise to stainless wisdom, understanding, dependent arising, and emptiness. And thereby can eliminate the root of all afflictive emotions, negative karma, and thereby suffering. And give rise to a continuous, ever, continuously arising cause of well-being and happiness. Okay, thank you all. And yeah, so see you next Tuesday for a meditation session.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you,
so much.
Venerable. That's Mary Ellen and Bruce and everyone.
Trouble so much. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Thank you, Urs. Thanks everyone for trying so hard.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, Palma.
Bye bye, everyone.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah.